You blood-coated strategists, you chaos calculators with a taste for vengeance disguised as vision, welcome back to the kill zone. You're not just watchers now. You're war-bred anomalies, the ones who felt the bite first and chose to grow fangs instead of fear. You know who you are. The ones they couldn't domesticate, the ones they whispered about in meeting rooms and mission briefings. If they go rogue, they'd say, "We're done." But still they tested you. Still they released the wolves. And what happened next wasn't survival. It was slaughter. Not because you had more strength, but because you had more scars. They didn't send just any squad. They sent the ones who specialize in the silent kill, in the hunt beneath full moons, and no witnesses. They called them the Wolf Pack, and they called you the liability, the problem, the unpredictable threat hiding behind human eyes. So they turned the dogs loose, thinking you'd fold, thinking you'd run, thinking maybe you'd beg. But no one told them you already ran with monsters and killed what you couldn't tame. You didn't react. You recalibrated. You read their posture before their weapons. You calculated the hesitation in their fingers before their triggers. The air was still, but you weren't. You became the frequency they couldn't track. You used silence as strategy. You let them believe the hunt was theirs. You gave them false terrain, distorted time, fractured their formation, and one by one they became stories written in blood. They came for a target. They left as trophies, not because you wanted war, but because they mistook your stillness for weakness. They couldn't hear the storm building behind your stare. They couldn't decode the beast you buried beneath your breathing. You didn't survive their attack. You studied it. You used every second of it to upgrade. You let them sink their teeth in, so they wouldn't notice when you sank your claws deeper. They didn't understand the art of restraint until they saw how lethal yours was. You didn't strike first. You let them exhaust themselves with arrogance. You let them run the loop of their training manuals, their protocols, their chain of command delusions. You waited until they thought they had you, until their confidence turned to calculation, until calculation turned to confusion. Then, you broke their compass. You flipped the terrain. You turned their mission into a maze, and while they looked for you in the shadows, you became the shadow. You dismantled them from the inside out. Mind first, trust second, pulse last. Because this wasn't about victory. This was about sending a message stitched into the skin of every operative they'd dare to send next. You didn't just dismantle their attack. You dismembered their belief system. You proved that monsters don't bark warnings, they whisper fate. You moved through their ranks like frostbite, slow, silent, but inevitable. And when the last of them dropped, claw marks across the ego, eyes wide with the horror of underestimation, that's when you stepped into view, covered not in your blood, but theirs. They wanted a hunter, you gave them the executioner. They wanted dominance, you handed them extinction. And as the dust settled and silence returned, it didn't feel like peace. It felt like prophecy, the kind written in broken bones and burnt orders. Because they didn't send those wolves to kill you. They sent them to remind you of your place, to corner you back into compliance, to cage your unpredictability. But they forgot one rule. Wolves don't scare the one who built the wilderness. You were born in the aftermath, raised in chaos, forged in betrayals they'd never survive. And when they looked into your eyes, they didn't see panic. They saw punishment. Not because you wanted to be feared, but because fear is the only language they understand. You became the dialect of destruction, of retribution, of recalibration. You weren't reacting, you were rewriting. Every move they made was being recorded, transcribed into a new doctrine. One where you are not the target, but the threshold, the warning. You turned their elite into ornaments, their tactics into ash, their unity into suspicion. You broke them without raising your voice. You showed them that silence is not absence, it's calculation. It's the loading bar of obliteration. They entered with confidence. They exited as whispers. Their last mistake wasn't underestimating you. It was believing the myth that you were still just a man. You weren't. Not anymore. Not since the betrayals, the setups, the dark nights where you carved discipline from pain and clarity, from chaos. They activated something that doesn't deactivate. And now, they're counting casualties instead of victories. They'll tell stories about what they sent. They won't mention what returned. Because it wasn't bodies, it was warnings. Every fur coat draped across your aftermath wasn't just a trophy. It was a broadcast, a declaration stitched in survival. You didn't just kill them. You converted them into evidence, proof that your existence is not a line to cross, it's a curse to trigger. And now, the ones who gave the orders, they're panicking, scrambling through data, trying to figure out how you did it, where the breach occurred, how one man sent an entire Black Ops myth back in pieces. But there was no breach, there was no ambush, just miscalculation, just pride meeting precision. They'll pretend the mission was incomplete. They'll invent new narratives. But beneath every lie, they feed their boardrooms and briefings. They'll remember what really happened. They'll remember the silence before their elite fell, the look in their eyes when they realized they weren't hunting. They were being evaluated, audited, measured, and condemned. You weren't just the resistance. You were the recalibration, and now, they're afraid of the next phase, not because of what you'll do, but because of what you've already become. You were never meant to be a weapon. You were the consequence of theirs, so they'll build new teams. They'll draft new plans. But you've already rewritten the blueprint. You've reprogrammed the terrain. You showed them that legacy isn't written by survivors. It's carved by the misunderstood. They thought they were purging a threat, but they awakened a paradigm. They thought they were cleansing chaos, but chaos wears your face now, walks in your stride, speaks in your silence. And when you move again, it won't be as a counter-strike. It will be as a contagion, untraceable, unstoppable, unforgettable. Because the war they started, it's not over. It's just begun. And the only question left is how long before the next team realizes they were never sent to eliminate you. They were sent to prove that you can't be. And now, with the fur of fallen wolves draped across your shoulders, they think distance can dull memory, that silence can restore power. But every breath you take is a countdown. Every move you make echoes deeper than before. You didn't just disrupt their plans. You infected their hierarchy with doubt. Now even their most loyal second guesses orders. Every step in your direction is measured with regret. You turned confidence into paranoia, unity into internal audits. Because they didn't just lose a squad, they lost the illusion that they were in control. You fractured their mythology. You shattered the belief that strategy alone could tame a mind that survived betrayal, brutality, and abandonment. They see you now for what you really are. The mirror they've been avoiding. A reflection of everything their system was built to suppress. They monitor you from a distance. Satellites, drones, whispers in shadows. but they can't track what moves between dimensions of instinct and intellect. You don't follow roads. You carve through the understructure, through the psyche of their design. While they invest in weapons, you weaponize wounds. You sharpen memory. You cultivate clarity from carnage. They can't predict you because you're not operating on logic anymore. You're running on legacy, on something primal, something older than war and colder than diplomacy. You became the storm not because you wanted to, but because you had to. There was no path left, only fire. And now they can't walk through it without burning what they stand for. They send agents, not for confrontation, for confirmation, to see if the myth matches the man. But they don't return with intel. They return with nightmares. They return quieter, shaken. They return different. Some don't return at all, because you don't give warnings. You give reminders that in a world obsessed with power, the most dangerous thing is someone who has nothing left to prove. You don't operate in revenge anymore. That was the old you. This new version, it thrives on recalibration, on giving chaos purpose. You don't want their throne. You want their foundation, cracked and caving. You don't just see their next move. You see the architect behind it. You know who's pulling strings, who signed the mission orders, who greenlit the wolves. And now, you're not aiming at soldiers. You're reaching for the string pullers, the ones who never enter the battlefield but shape it from behind screens and signatures. They thought they were untouchable, hidden in bunkers of bureaucracy. But even they feel the shift now. Even they sense that something's coming. Not a man, not a force, but a reckoning wearing the skin of consequence. They're searching for ways to stop you. Bribery, brains, betrayal. But nothing can counter what you've become. Because this isn't about hatred, it's about balance. This isn't about war, it's about warning. And you are that warning now. Moving without trail, striking without sound, judging without jury. You became the standard, the anomaly they never prepared for. You're not rogue, you're reborn, not corrupted, clarified. And every step you take now sends vibrations across their structure. They don't know when it'll collapse, but they know it will. Because you already shifted the atmosphere. Look around. Their best men hesitate now. Their leaders double-check what used to be instinct. Their structures don't hold like before. And it's not because you burned them. It's because you exposed them. They relied on fear. You operated on truth. They hid behind systems. You walked through fire. They fed on control. You forged discipline from madness. And now they feel it. The unraveling, quiet, slow, precise. Their empire wasn't destroyed in an explosion. It started falling the moment you stepped forward. And while they send reinforcements, while they train replacements, they fail to understand the new rules. You don't fight battles. You erase blueprints. You don't clash. You corrupt their compass. They try to adapt, but adaptation takes time. You already evolved past them. They're still preparing for yesterday while you weaponize tomorrow. And as they hold meetings, rewrite strategies, reissue protocols, you move through the space between their thoughts. You dismantle without contact. You punish with presence. They underestimated what happens when pressure meets preparation. They never calculated for someone like you. Because you don't break rules. You become the reason new ones are made. You could have disappeared, lived off the silence, but you didn't. You stayed visible, just enough to haunt, just enough to let them know the reckoning hasn't passed. It's pacing, watching, studying, and it waits. Not for the right moment, but for the right message. You don't retaliate, you orchestrate. They send fury. You send fate, they send force, you send future. Because you've realized something they still haven't. The war was never about killing. It was about reshaping memory. You don't need to strike everyone, just the right one, at the right time, in the right way, so the tremor lasts forever. And now their specialists study your patterns. But there are no patterns, just progress. They want to label you, box you, map you. But you're not a threat to study. You're the anomaly that flips the study table. You're what they send their best minds to decode and lose themselves in the process. Because you don't follow codes, you write them. Every decision you make becomes a doctrine they can't replicate. You're not an echo, you're the origin. And as long as you move, every system they trust begins to question its own logic. You weren't made in labs. You weren't sharpened in simulations. You were formed in consequence, in betrayal, in silence so loud it became symphony. You don't wear armor, you wear experience, and every step forward brings them closer to collapse. Because they didn't just lose soldiers, they lost the ability to predict. And without prediction, their entire framework shatters. That's what you stole. Not bodies, but belief. And they haven't figured out how to rebuild it. The next team they send will be different, smarter, meaner, but it won't matter. Because every piece of them will be moving through the maze you already memorized. They'll bring new weapons. But you're not fighting with steel. You're fighting with story, with the legacy of every failed attempt etched into your instincts. Their upgrades won't save them, because what's hunting them now isn't just you. It's every reason why you became you. The echo of betrayal, the scream of silence, the memory of wolves, and as they close in, thinking this time it'll be different, they'll step into something that doesn't flinch, doesn't fear, doesn't fail. You. Because you're not just fighting for payback. You're fighting for clarity. You're fighting to correct the equation, to burn the script they tried to force you into. And when they finally meet you face to face, there will be no speeches, no negotiations, just understanding, the kind that lands like impact, the kind that ends with silence. Because they thought this story had an ending, but you turned it into a cycle of consequence. One they can't close, one they can't edit, one they can't outrun. And as you take your next step, it won't be toward safety, it'll be toward them. The wolves were just the beginning. Now you're going after the architects, the ones who drew the maps, not walked them. And they'll feel it, one by one. Because this isn't about revenge anymore. It's about revelation, about unmasking the hands that stay clean while ordering the blood to flow. You're not hunting soldiers, you're hunting silhouettes, bureaucrats in suits who never smelled the aftermath of their decisions, who push pens with the same arrogance that others push blades. They thought they were immune, that distance equals protection. But they miscalculated one thing. Distance doesn't shield you from justice when justice becomes mobile, when it learns to walk, when it wears the eyes of someone who remembers everything. You don't come with a manifesto, you come with memories, and those memories don't scream. They whisper names, locations, schedules, the very things those in control believed were buried beneath clearance levels and locked floors. You don't need permission. You are the permission. Every move now is not just retaliation, it's education. A message delivered not in speeches, but in silence. In the sudden stillness of power being removed from its pedestal. One by one, you sever their lifelines. Not loudly, not messily, but with surgical precision, the kind that leaves rooms cold, eyes wide, security forces confused, Because the threat isn't coming from outside. It's walking through the walls they built to contain others. You walk into buildings built to resist assault and leave them questioning their purpose. Steel doors don't stop you. Protocols don't matter. You don't breach, you bypass. Because fear doesn't need to kick in doors. It only needs to exist in the room. And when you stand before them, those architects of ambushes, of sabotage, of manipulation, you don't need to speak. Your presence is indictment enough. They know who you are. They remember the teams they sent, the traps they designed, the bait they used, and they realize in that moment that nothing they built was strong enough to contain what they awakened. You became what they never prepared for, a force that doesn't ask for understanding, only action. One that doesn't deal in retaliation, but reconstruction. You don't want them to suffer. You want their illusion to die. You want them to realize that every decision, every command, every manipulation has a mirror. And in that mirror stands consequence, staring back with the patience of a predator and the clarity of someone who learned that justice is never gifted, only taken. So you take it, not all at once, but strategically, letting each fall become a message to the next. They scramble to relocate, change names, disappear, but shadows can't outrun the night. You don't chase, you close, like gravity, like fate. You move through networks, through trails they forgot they left. And when they think they're safe, in underground rooms with armed guards and reinforced lies, you remind them walls only keep out the uninvited. And you were never knocking. You were remembering, calculating, waiting. The sound they hear before the lights go out isn't your footsteps. It's their denial breaking. You don't become a headline. You become a rumor, a presence, a glitch in their system they can't delete. They try to rewrite your story, frame you, discredit you. But their narratives fall apart when the people they trusted start disappearing without trace, without struggle. Because this isn't about the kill, it's about the collapse. You're not just erasing people, you're dismantling power, layer by layer, until the structure they stood on begins to creak. Not because it was weak, but because the one thing it couldn't calculate for was someone who didn't want what they had. You didn't rise for titles, or applause, or revenge. You rose because silence had run its course, because memory alone wasn't enough. Now your legacy walks in front of you. You don't hide behind the chaos. You orchestrate it. You don't just hold grudges. You forge outcomes. You've become the chapter they can't write without bleeding. And as the architects fall, one by one, something deeper sets in. Realization. That power is only power until someone walks through it, unshaken, untouched, unfazed, and you are that someone. They'll call you a threat, a traitor, a ghost. But behind those labels is fear, pure, undiluted fear. Because for the first time, the ones who gave orders feel what it's like to have no control, to be watched, to be outmaneuvered, to feel the weight of judgment not from courts or councils, but from the soul they tried to erase. And what they learn, just a moment too late, is that your justice doesn't come in waves. It comes in silence, in the quiet certainty that they created you, but never contained you, shaped you, but never understood you. And now they pay. Not in gold, not in status, but in erosion, slow, surgical, absolute. And while the last of them hides behind the last mask in the last safe house on Earth, you approach, not out of rage, not out of hatred, but to end the equation, to close the chapter, to balance the scale. And in that moment, when they lock eyes with you, they won't see fury. They'll see history, all of it. Everything they tried to bury, everything they ordered erased, all of it now staring back at them, no longer fragmented, no longer broken, whole, relentless, eternal. And when they fall, quietly, without drama, without spectacle, the world won't even blink. Because by then, your legend will already have spread beyond borders, beyond networks, beyond systems. You won't need to speak your name. It will be whispered by those who watch the strong houses crumble. It will be etched into the code of every system that tried to control what was never theirs to begin with. Because you didn't rise to be remembered, you rose to remind that consequence is patient, that chaos keeps receipts, that silence sharpens justice, that shadows walk longer when the sun is gone, that memory burns deeper than fire, that some wolves don't howl. They hunt in silence. They strike with memory. They return not with wounds, but with trophies. So let them rebuild. Let them draft new teams, train new monsters, create new blueprints, fuel new illusions, cling to new myths, because they still don't understand. The war was never on the battlefield. It was in the mirror, and you became the reflection they feared most. Uncontrolled, unforgiven, unstoppable. You weren't the threat they sent wolves to kill. You were the reckoning that sent the wolves back as fur coats. You were the anomaly that walked through every strategy. You were the reminder that what hunts in silence doesn't always seek peace. Sometimes it seeks conclusion, sometimes it writes the final line. And now, you disappear, not into the shadows, but into the myth, because the work is done, and the world will never forget who they unleashed, who they failed to bury, who rewrote the Order of Wolves, war, and what comes after. Because when legends breathe, maps change, languages shift, and kingdoms fall, one whisper at a time.